Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Meet the Artist, part of our Quarantunes digital performance series highlighting and celebrating the diverse traditions of South Carolina. My name is Ian Halligan, Folklife Program Coordinator for the McKissick Museum at the University of South Carolina. During Meet the Artist, we will be sitting down with performers in our Quarantunes series to learn more about the art forms represented, as well as the performers themselves. Before we begin, I would like to thank the South Carolina Arts Commission for their support of this evening's event. Meet the Artist and Quarantunes would not have been possible without the Folklife Partnership Grant, which the Arts Commission provides McKissick Museum to amplify their traditional arts programs. Additionally, I would like to thank the Oconee History Museum and Walhalla for generously providing space for tonight's Meet the Artist. With that said, I am joined tonight by Andy Brooks. Andy Brooks' musical journey is inspired by multiple traditions, yielding a collection of hundreds of tunes that he knows and plays by heart. Brooks' love of the fiddle has led him far and wide, seeking out albums, festivals, and fiddlers to expand his repertoire and learn a variety of styles. An avid educator, Brooks has taught in the Young Appalachian Musicians After School program and the Oconee Heritage Center in Walhalla. Brooks' dedication and talent has earned him recognition, including winning the 2016 South Carolina State Fiddle Championship at Haygood Mill in Pickens, where he also placed second in banjo. And he received the Jean Laney Harris Folk Heritage Award, in 2019. Passionate about sharing his knowledge of the history, songs, and spirit of old-time music, Brooks is keeping the tradition alive. Andy, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
And thanks for having me, Ian.
Starting right off here, I kind of just want to learn how you first got into old-time music. Did you grow up listening to it and other kind of traditional music?
Not exactly. Elements of my family were very musical. My grandmother was a fine piano player, played totally by ear. The other side of the family were always in church with them, and we had a lot of great singing, usually just accompanied by piano. So in the Glenwood Wesleyan Church in Easley, South Carolina. But that music's kind of stuck with me. My grandmother's older brother, Sammy Lee Stevens, was probably very important in getting me started into traditional music, because when I was a kid, and I'm talking like 4 or 5 years old, we would be over at my great grandmother's house, and he would always sit with me on the couch and let me kind of pluck the strings on his banjo. And he was really good about working with kids. And a lot of times they wouldn't let children near an instrument, but he would get me over there and say, pluck these strings, and then he would play a little bit. So that came back many years later. He really became a mentor to me on the fiddle when I was probably a teenager, early 20s.
Didn't know I was muted. Can you talk a little bit more about that, as far as, how he inspired you in this early period of time with playing the music?
Well, as a child, I think it kind of planted the seed in my brain. And a lot of times that's what you need to do as an educator. You're not going so much for the student that's going to go out there and start performing and winning contests and all that stuff. You're just planting a seed that'll come back later. And I'm sure that's where my curiosity came from later on, was sitting there with Sammy and his banjo, because when I was a teenager and I finally bought a banjo, I was playing some guitar. I had an old guitar with a broken neck that I bought for $11, and I learned some guitar. And then when I started learning banjo, I would go back over and see Sammy and show him what I've learned. I was kind of proud and I thought, well, he'll enjoy the fact that that's come back to me, and I'm doing that now. But then he thought that the fiddle was everything, and the best thing you can be in life was a fiddler, and I feel that way now. But no, he was. He said, well, if you can play these, if the banjo's coming this easy for you, you need to play fiddle. And he gave me a fiddle. And so at some point, there was a period of time that went by, and I know I dated a girl that spilled paint all over the case one time, and all kinds of things happened. But I still tried to play it. And I learned one tune. The fiddle was very difficult for me initially. There's no frets, and there's a lot of intuitive things that happen with the fiddle over time, and it sort of becomes much easier to you. You just stick with it. But I learned one tune. It was Liberty, and it's a very old fiddle tune. And I was trying to give the fiddle back to Sammy because I had really just become fed up with it. I said, this is too hard. And I went by there one afternoon and I said, I'm just going to give this back to you. And he had told me it's no problem. He said, if you want to just stick with your banjo, you're doing fine. And I said, but I will show you what I've learned. And I played Liberty, and he was just beside himself. Oh, you got to keep it, keep it. You know, you've learned that much, keep going. And, you know, that was a long time ago, and I kept going. So grabbing one at a time. Initially, they come pretty slowly, and then they start coming faster. So up somewhere in, I don't know, 300, 400 tune range now.
Oh, wow. So starting from Liberty, and you almost gave up the fiddle, it sounds like.
Yeah, you know, it's easy to get frustrated. I did the same thing with the banjo. When I bought a banjo, I used to walk by the old Dixie music shop in Easley. And so I got to know Mr. Willie Bowman, and he's been dead for years now, but I bought my first banjo from him, and I'm telling you, it was a piece of junk. It was probably it might be good to fend off an intruder or something, but it was not good for music. It was very hard to play. And I really got frustrated with it, and I tried to give it back or trade up on a guitar or something. He was like, "No, stick with it." And he was so encouraging that I couldn't give it back to him, you know. So I would take it home and work with it some more. And finally, it kind of started clicking. When the banjo started clicking, it started coming in bunches, you know. So that was really, really a cool time.
And how old were you again when you started playing banjo and fiddle?
I bought my first banjo. I had just started driving, so I was probably like 16. And I think I was working in the summer, and I had a little bit more money than normal. I mean, this banjo was so cheap; it may have been, you know, $100 or something like that, but it was not worth that. Now the fiddle was probably a couple of years later, so I was probably 18 or 19, and Sammy gave me a fiddle. Unfortunately, it was stolen about 10 or 12 years ago,
Oh, wow.
but I still have the case with the paint that was spilled on it, so it's kind of a relic from that time. But the fiddle it was not a real good one either. He bought it when he came back from World War II, but just because they're old doesn't mean they're really good, you know. It was a trade fiddle, but it served the purpose. I learned a lot of stuff on it.
Yeah, and it seems like, I don't know, it seems like talking to a lot of artists whenever they start on these instruments, they always seem to be starting on ones that are, either falling apart or there's something broken or wrong with them. But do you feel that kind of makes you appreciate once you get up to, a better quality instrument, make you really appreciate the differences?
There's no doubt. It's kind of like marriages, you know. You a bad one to make you appreciate a great one. No, honestly, Mr. Bowman used to say that Earl Scruggs could have walked into his shop and played any banjo in the shop and made it sound pretty good. But you know, when you're starting out, you're definitely not Earl Scruggs, and the beginners need the most help, but they very seldom invest much in an instrument. So the professionals are playing the best stuff out there. And it's true that you really do, once you get to a point where you're good enough and you can afford it, you really do appreciate a great instrument.
Awesome. And, kind of going off of this focus on firsts, do you kind of remember your first performance and how old you were?
Wow. The first thing I started doing was actually sneaking out of town and going over to Georgia. And I would just like sit out at a flea market and busk, I guess, and really not for the intent of making money. It was just, okay, well, I'm away from people I know. And what I found to happen with that was I would play the fiddle tunes I knew. You usually didn't get to play many because if you're out there alone, people will come up and talk to you a lot. You know, if you're out there with 4 or 5 people, they won't approach you so much. But There was one over there around Clayton. I don't know the name of the flea market, and I would go over there just to get over the nervousness of, playing in front of people.
Is that around the same time that you were in high school and could drive?
Yeah, and just after for sure. I always, it's kind of odd. I felt like in the era that I was in high school, I didn't feel like it was that cool to be playing that music. I think I mentioned on the Quarantunes video about hair bands. I was kind of half joking about it, but it's true. It was a different era in the mid 80s, early 80s. And I remember people making jokes about playing a banjo and stuff, and Deliverance didn't do us any favors around here, in my opinion. So, yeah, I kept it on under my hat for sure. And a lot of times I would ride around. I had this tape I bought when I was probably 15 or 16. I know I couldn't drive because my mother and I had gone over to Greenville because we didn't have any big stores in Easley at that time. We had, but we would go over to Kmart in Greenville. And I bought a tape of, it's called The Golden Hits of Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs. I don't think I had any idea, or maybe I did from the Beverly Hillbillies, just the vaguest idea who they were. And we put that tape in going home. I think my mom was looking at me like, what in the world did you buy? What is this? And I was just amazed. I couldn't listen to that enough. The first song that came on was Foggy Mountain Breakdown, the original cut. And still, it's pretty amazing to me to this day. It's really a classic album. But I also had one at the time that I was just buying whatever I could find. And there was one that was like 30 mountain instrumentals or something like that. And fortunately, it had all kinds of stuff. It had like Dave Macon and very early old time stuff. And then it blended in some early bluegrass, like the Stanley Brothers. But I still have that tape somewhere. And I felt like it probably should be gone by now as much as I played it. But those were bought about the same time, and it really kept that. I started asking myself at that point, I started playing a lot of bluegrass, and I guess I've always had that folklorist, folk collector sort of curiosity about what were people playing at different points in time. What kind of instruments were they playing? What songs were they singing? So all that started rolling right in there, 16, 17, 18, certainly by college.
That's so very interesting when you're a kid and, this music was looked at as being very uncool, and, you're having to like go to Georgia to, busk and perform where there's no other folks. Was it kind of being able to buy this music and be exposed to this other music like Scruggs and Dave Macon and whatnot that kind of kept you going and wanting to pursue it, especially when I imagine there was really no one else in your grade that was playing this music?
Yeah, and it was really inspiring because these were the top of the game. People like Maynard's Mountaineers, I'll never forget Run Mountain and Chuck a Little Hill. I still play that to this day, but it was on that one of those tapes. I played Walking in My Sleep in Quarantunes, and the first time I heard it was Bill Clifton on that first tape, riding around in the car. But yeah, it was not, I felt like I would have been ridiculed at my school. Because I remember at my church, there was a little kid and he was trying to play banjo, and the guys that went to church would kind of make fun of him. Like, I'm not going to say his name, but it was like Joe and his banjo, why don't he bring out his banjo? And there was a laugh. So, but all that changed. When you go to college, everything changes. So I found that when I started to college, one of the first things I did was pull into this little apartment I rented, and here's a guy sitting on the tailgate of his truck playing a banjo. Everybody's cool all of a sudden. I was only 30 minutes down the road. I went to Clemson, so everything changed at that point, and didn't really care who heard it at that point. Everybody thought it was pretty neat that you did something like that.
And when you went to college, did you have more opportunity to, start playing with groups and really expanding your abilities?
I was kind of intimidated that guy I was talking about, Chris Addington. He lives in Dacusville. He's still a very fine banjo player, as far as I know. But his brother-in-law was a guy named Ricky Dixon, and Ricky's an amazing guitar player. So these guys, it was not as if I was just running into, guys that were trying to play music. These guys could play, and so I would sit in, and I think it gave me a little bit of an inferiority complex because I was listening to these guys fly, and they're in there playing Grateful Dead, and I mean all the current modern stuff, whatever was happening at that time. And I was like, man, I'm just this is a whole different experience. At the same time, I think around 1987, I started coming up here to Walhalla. There was a jam that happened out at, you never think of the name of the little store outside of Walhalla on 183, but gosh. But anyway, there was a jam that happened at that store, and the guy that lived next door would host the jam. That's where I met Charles Wood, and Charles has been a national banjo champion. There was just a lot of great players around, and so it gave me something to work for. I don't think you should ever get discouraged with that. I really count my blessings now that there were so many great players around.
Mm-hmm. And were the players themselves, was it kind of a very welcoming environment?
Yeah, I've never, I was thinking about that on the way over. And I always say, I've only had one really bad experience in my whole time playing music. And it's just a guy I can't click with, and he doesn't, and everybody has the same experience with him. But I mean, there's been hundreds that have been very welcoming. And Lord knows I've stayed at so many people's houses back when I was really going to a lot of stuff. And I would just take off and go up into North Carolina just to play some music for the weekend. I'd stay at somebody's house, and or people would stay at mine. And it's just that kind of community when COVID's not going on anyway.
Right. Yeah, and kind of going off on another thing here, one of the big things that is very close to you and very important to you is that of education and teaching this music for the future. And I'd love to hear, how did you first get into teaching, and how did you go from starting out with teaching folks to doing it a lot more intensely and a lot more regularly?
I never really intended to teach. I mean, I have a full-time career, so sometimes it makes it hectic to do so. But there was a period there, maybe early mid 2000s, where I got into the Yams teaching with Pickens County, and Yams is Young Appalachian Musicians. I did that at Liberty for several years, Liberty Elementary School. And I was playing all kinds of stuff up here in Oconee County for some reason. And I would do workshops, and I was just getting asked to do a lot of stuff. It just lined up that way. Played an old time fiddle workshop over in Westminster, and I know I did a dance fiddle workshop out at the Oconee Agricultural Fair, and but one thing was kind of leading to another, and then I got asked to, or more or less drafted to play in Bill Lowe's bluegrass band, so I ended up playing bluegrass fiddle. But out of all that, I know at some point in time I met Jennifer Moss and Leslie White, and they run the Oconee History Museum, and they asked if I would teach class, fiddle class. And I thought, well, that'd be cool. And I thought they, maybe they met one time. It was I thought it would be a fiddle appreciation class. But it ended up, it lasted for 10 years until COVID hit. And there was always people signing up. And it's been a really neat thing. And out of that, there's actually spawned a community of people that get together every Tuesday and play music together. So I never thought it would be what it is. It was very much in my mind, it was just a a one-time thing. And I said, okay, I'll do this. And I'll have a couple of students and I'll show them some fiddle tunes and they'll go on their way. But they just kept coming back. So um, big credit to these folks up here for backing that and wanting me to keep teaching. And we've had also done some banjo classes and guitar, done a lot of things up here in mandolin.
Mhm. And with teaching too, has that kind of changed the way that you think about the instrument that you play?
Oh yeah, teaching's great. It helps to keep you really dialed in. Um, because honestly, I'm one of those people that there's a couple of different types of fiddle players. There's some that I look at and they're really technicians. That everything has to be a certain way, and I'm one of those. I kind of like the spontaneity. I listen to it. I don't want to play it just exactly like somebody does, but I'll listen to it several times and then do my own take on it. And but teaching makes me really dial in, and sometimes it's actually hard to slow down tunes and break them down for somebody because I'm used to playing them fast and not really. You kind of zone out, don't think too much about it. It just kind of comes out of your brain. But that's a good thing when in the pre-COVID times, and hopefully soon hereafter. But it makes me really focus in on my style and it makes me a sharper player.
Mhm. Yes, we can only hope that COVID is going to be over and done with so we can get back to all the fun music and yeah, fingers are crossed. And kind of going off of this teaching thing for you, what is the importance of continuing this music onward to the next generation of players?
Well, when I got into it, the whole thing for me was the sense of community, and that was just hard for me to find anywhere else. And I'll tell you a quick funny story. Um, I met this guy named Bill Adams, and I was invited to play with a pickup band for a fish fry down in Loungeville, South Carolina, near Lake Russell. And this was years ago in the early 1990s. So I ended up playing this gig with like three people I've never met. And one of them's this really good guitar player, older guy named Bill Adams. And he asked me to come to Galax, Virginia to play in the band competition with him. I said, sure, I'll meet you up there. Well, I went to Galax, and anybody who might listen to this knows that Galax is a monster of a festival. But in my mind, all I had been to is small stuff. So I pull into the town, and I look out there and I see all these flags flying and these campers, and I thought, my God, there must be a NASCAR race or something up here. So I go into a store and ask the girl that was behind the register. I said, "Where is this fiddlers convention?" And she just looks out the window at all the flags and campers. She said, "Right over there, dummy." So I went, but that weekend, I think that was around 1990 or so, and it really cemented my love for the people that play this music, because I was walking around there, I didn't know a soul. Never found Bill Adams. Came to find out we didn't have cell phones or anything at that time, so his truck had broken down on the way up,
Oh,
but I
no.
hung out there for 3 or 4 days, and everybody would take me into their tent, and uh, back then I was on the fiddle anyway. I was getting that sympathetic smile, like, "Oh, nice try. You're doing well." It was nice when I could come back. 5 or 6 years later, I came back and people were looking at me like, "Hey, you kind of know what you're doing, don't you?" But that's what I love about this music. These people take you in and they want you to do well. And but I thought I'd share that. It was my whole experience with music has just been, I loved it. It appealed to me. It made me feel happy. And I thought, well, if it makes me feel happy, it makes other people feel happy. So I've just kind of stumbled along and had these opportunities open up. There was never any intent to find people and get them to play. It's just, and I've had experiences where I was playing on stage somewhere, and somebody would come up and say, "Man, I love the way you played that Lost Indian. I wish I could do that." And I always said, "Why can't you? If I can do it, you can do it. I'm not that smart." So Yeah, that's the fun of it, seeing people, giving people encouragement and maybe leading them to do something they hadn't done before.
Mhm. And as we start to wrap up here, I'm curious to learn from your perspective. We have been talking a little bit about COVID and how that's impacted the the whole music scene, just generally speaking here. But outside of that, and just from your years of playing, what do you see as kind of the greatest challenges going forward in continuing this music? And what are you most excited about for the future of this music?
Well, the the challenges are going to be recovering what we had before COVID. Normally, in a year like this, I would have already played maybe five contra dances or square dances or some combination, but no dancing this year. So it'll just be up to people to, get recharged and get these things started again. And I haven't played a jam. I think I played a jam in March, right before it started going strong. And I mean, with like five or six people or more, but all those have sort of ended. And it's going to be up to all of us to just kind of pick in and host some things, get people back out. I really want to see dancing get started again. Not so much because I like to play for them, but it's just a cool thing to see people do. I mean, if you ever see people do traditional dance, and especially when you're at stage level, it's a really beautiful thing. And we had a good thing going with the old Kiwi contra dance over at South Cove Park up here, but everything's kind of been suspended. Now, the thing that gives me hope about it is right now I'm doing the mentor thing, and I have an apprentice, Amelia T-Balt, and to see young people like her that just love the music, that's very encouraging. You know, so you still see kids that look, they're not glued to the TV or their PlayStation or whatever's out there now. They're the latest technology. She loves to play music, and she's really good at it. She's going to be great.
And do you feel that, this generation or the current generation of kids that are being raised on kind of this music, compared to when you were a kid, do you think that it's considered a lot cooler now than when you were growing up?
I think so. When I listen to just say WNCW and listen to some more modern bands and artists that are out there, I hear a lot of clawhammer banjo now, and that's really sweet because even though I play a lot of bluegrass banjo too, but my love is clawhammer and especially fretless. And I'm hearing young people do that stuff now, and some good fiddle stuff. So I think there was a time in my life I wouldn't have considered listening to somebody that young. I was listening to all these old guys, and learning about their lives. But now there's some pretty good people out there playing good stuff. It just needs to be more. Sometimes it's just an awareness thing. I know I worked with a guy, and I sent him to. I made a suggestion to him that while he and his wife were in Asheville, they go to the Lake Eaton Arts Festival. And he came back, and he didn't really know anything about me personally. And he came back and said, "We watched this band," and he said, "I don't know what they were doing, but man, you just couldn't help but move." And he described it, and they had a fiddle, a banjo, guitar, and a bass. I said, "Yeah, that's what I do." And he had no idea, but he'd never heard that music before. And then,
Mhm.
so a lot of times it's just you just got to get it out there. Keep the faith, and sometimes you play things and it's like nobody's interested, and sometimes you play things and people go crazy over it. So just you got to keep going, and that's what we need to do after COVID ends. I think get back out there and keep going.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a great place to end it. I want to say thank you for everyone that tuned in for joining us this evening. I would specifically like to thank Andy for sharing your music, your knowledge, and your experiences with us tonight. For those wanting to see Andy Brooks' performance on Quarantunes, you can watch the full show on Facebook or YouTube. And thank you again to the South Carolina Arts Commission for their support of Meet the Artist and Quarantunes. Again, thank you very much. Everyone, have a great night.